Dan, that's a soft-spoken, clever Sue. We have survived a week in the UK. We feel quite proud of ourselves. We've matured somewhat. I've become quite aspirational. I had a lift in Sharon's car the other day, and you won't believe it, but they have seats that warm your bum. The best thing since sliced bread. Nothing we've ever seen before, and we really enjoyed it. So as we kick off, thanks for feedback. Last week there were forms on the table, and we got some info that helps us understand you better about what worked and how to be more relevant. So we spent a couple of days tweaking our material for today. I'm quite excited. We self-identified last week as lifelong learners, and I've managed to chuck out half the talk we prepared 6 months ago because of so much new stuff, and it's so helpful that we try to incorporate into it. So our roadmap this evening is going to always good to begin with the end in mind. Sharon mentioned the end in mind really should be tables and not just food on them. So please munch and drink while we talk. There isn't going to be a special eating time afterwards. So to begin with the end in mind, we're going to be talking first input. We will, as soon as you fall asleep, we'll stop talking. So if you've had enough, fall off your seat, we all know to be quiet. But we have prepped it for about 50 minutes, not longer than that. Then to what for us is the most exciting part of the evening, opportunity for the village to actually enter into a little bit of dialogue. Now, I don't think I did my silly example last week of dialogue as opposed to discussion. I've got a thing about discussion because it's like concussion, precussion. It's a banging together of ideas, whereas dialogue is a more gentle way of talking. It's allowing a flow of conversation. So as you talk to each other around the table, it's just an opportunity to share and learn from each other. And that to us is probably the best thing that the village can do, because when we go back to the country, they don't have butt warming seats. You are left with each other as resources, and to us that's very, very important. So, after questions, we'll close. We'll do our best to get you out of here by 9:30, and I hope you've switched on your electric blankets. A quick challenge for me, wearing not my parenting hat, but just a general scripture union hat to lead us into this evening session. And one of the things that worries me, I chair scripture union in South Africa, and that's all about encouraging kids to read the Bible and develop a relationship with Jesus. But what's happened is fewer and fewer people are reading Bibles as we read them in my youth. It was a big book, often a King James book or some other translation, and you knew a person's reading the Bible because they had a book in front of them. I now, very often, most of the time, read the Bible on an app. And I just wonder what your kids are learning about good Christian discipleship habits. About having a quiet and not reading the Bible. If you, like me, read it exclusively on your app, because the app is also a thing where there are 5,000 SMS messages. There's also, what I've discovered, Amazon and what we don't have in South Africa, eBay. And that can just gobble my attention. I go down rabbit holes looking at that sort of stuff. And just this morning, yesterday morning, preparing for the day, having my quiet time on my phone, ding, message from Cape Town. My daughters and grandkids reacting to photographs that we'd sent them of all the crazy Christmas jerseys that we saw in Reading at Primark and all the places there. You don't get those in South Africa. It's the middle of summer. So Christmas sweaters with anything. We sent oodles of photographs and choose what they wanted. And all these replies were coming back about exactly what they wanted and how cool it was and how nice it was and how cold it looked. And suddenly my quiet time became all about my grandchildren and their sweater choices. And after this time of early morning meditation, I sort of wondered if Jesus wore a Primark jersey or not. I got totally sort of sidetracked, which gets me to something I want to encourage you as parents, children to do when you are exploring and deep in your own faith. go back to reading a book. And where I learnt this was when my eldest daughter was about 8. We just had Hannah, our third daughter. She's a little baby, and it was Father's Day. And I woke up, and next to my bed was a card, which I wish I'd brought. I keep it in the big, heavy Bible I left at home, the one I use most of the time. It was a card from Jenny Kate, my 8-year-old. On the front it said, "Happy Father's Day." Opened it, said, "I love you. And I've made you a reusable voucher." And inside the card was stapled a cardboard voucher, and she explained to me it was on cardboard so I could use it many times. And it said, "If you put this on my pillow, I will come and wake you up so you can have your quiet time." And she said to my bed and said, "Let me explain that. She said, since Hannah was born, I know that you and Mom have bad nights. And when I come down with my early morning read, my study was right next to the loo. She said, I sometimes don't see you sitting at the desk having your quiet time." And I said to myself, Hannah's kept them up all night, and Dad's trying to catch up with sleep and he's missed his quiet time. She said, if ever that happens, just take this card in the middle of the night, you can come and put it next to my bed. And when I wake up and see that you've had a bad night, I'll come and wake you up to remind you to have your quiet time. So imprinted in my 8-year-old's mind was a picture of a father trying to grow in his faith journey by sitting in the same place on a regular basis, reading what she knew to be the Bible. It was before she was necessarily reading it herself, but it was an imprint on her that I think has probably lasted her till today, and she's 40 years old. It's lasted on me since then, and I'm 72 years old.
Okay, so I know there are some people that weren't here last week. Can you hear me? Can't hear me. Is it not on?
No, it is. You just got to right close to
Maybe I should hold it. Should I hold it? Let me hold it rather. How do you get it out?
Clever stuff.
Okay, and I must sort of swallow it. Can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay. Okay, so I want to, for those people who weren't here last week, and there are a few of you, and for those of you who were, sometimes it's nice to have a bit of a recap and a link to what we learned last week. But I think it does play into the whole idea of how to communicate with our kids about cell phones, screens, etc., which we will talk about. And last week we looked at connection, and we looked at how in attachment relationships, which is parent-child relationships, and all our close primary relationships, that we need safe, reliable connection. And I think in the context of screens, this connection can easily be eroded. And it actually often becomes a ground of conflict between parents and children. And we have to become very conscious about how we connect with our children when they're not on the screens. Is that okay? When they're not on the screens, to have that safe, reliable connection with them. And so I want to talk a little bit more. We spoke last week about integration, which is the different sides of our brains that we need to integrate in order to have the safe, reliable connection, in order to self-regulate, in order to understand how our brains work and how our children's brains work. And so understanding this integration, we can have conversations about social media that are perhaps better received. And so I want to recap on the integration of the brain as well. And it also links to some of the questions. I know quite a few of you did send questions, which we really appreciated. And I sort of clustered the questions together. And there were quite a few questions about self-regulation, about emotional regulation, and about dealing with big emotions, not only in ourselves, but also in our children. So really, first of all, and this is just a quick intro to what we'll speak about more later, is the whole idea that as mothers, yes, we also fly off the handle way more than we want to. And as we discussed last time, we may get it right like 8 out of 10, and then that 9 and 10 we can just let rip. And then we feel so bad that we've done that, you know. Why didn't we just hold it together all the time? And mostly it's because we're tired, we're worn out, and we're stressed. And the analogy of the full bucket, the full bucket of stress is there. And you imagine a bucket that is full up to the top of stress, tiredness, hard work, kids who are not behaving, frustrations, and you're up to here and something bumps you. That water will spray all over the place and there's no stopping it in that moment. And so it's no good saying, oh, I did it in that moment, I couldn't stop myself. Of course you couldn't. Your bucket was too full. So to go back to how do we empty our buckets is what we will speak about. I think it's next week or the following week, I'm not sure. So I just wanted to give that as just an intro that we can't regulate when we are already up to here. Someone bumps that, it is going to spill all over unless we run for the hills, which is an option. We can remove ourselves so that we don't spill it all out over everybody else. So that's just the thing about parenting regulation. But just in terms of regulating in terms of our children, I'm just going to remind you about the emotional right side of the brain, which is the emotional creative side of the brain, and the more logical left side of the brain. So your child, let's say the emotional right side of the brain is starting to act out, freak out, have big emotions, get irritated and saying, I hate school, I never want to go back again, I've had the worst day ever. So what do we normally do? We want to go to the left side, don't we? We want to go and say, oh, but you have to go to school or blah, blah, blah. But they just want the right side of our brains to connect with the right side of their brains. So if we're not triggered, it's more helpful. If we can then connect our right side, our emotional side, with their right side and mirror what they are saying. Oh, tough day at school today. I can see it was just horrible for you today. And the child can go, yes, you get me. It was horrible today. And I want to move it into a couple space, which of course this operates in a couple space as well. Maybe as a woman at the end of a hectic day of running around trying to work and do kids and everything, oh, I'm so exhausted. And you don't need your husband to say, well, you had such a late night last night, look at all the stuff you've got on your plate. We don't want that. We want them to say, oh, I can see how tired you are. Why don't you sit down? I can see your face, you're really, really tired. That's all. There's no solution involved, just mirroring the right side of our brain to connect with the right side of their brain. Then once we've done that and we've sat down with our cup of tea, the second thing, so the first is connect, right to right. Second is redirect. So when we have calmed down or when our child has calmed down, we are then more receptive to bring the right side logical thinking and the words of logic into the conversation. And the third point is name it to tame it. So help your child tell the story about what happened at school today. And their left brain, as they start to language, when I went to school today, there was this awful test, I didn't know it was going to happen, and then so-and-so, my friend wasn't at school, and blah, blah, blah. And they can start to talk about, and then the logic can come in. Okay, so that makes sense why your day was so bad. And as couples as well, we can maybe go into a more of a logical side after we've calmed down, sat down, felt connected with, and then we can move. And then I want to go into the integrating the upstairs mammalian brain to the downstairs reptilian brain. And when there's any threat, and are we talking about ourselves or about our children? If there's any threat, the reptilian brain, which is in our brain stem, gets triggered and people go into fight, flight, or freeze. So they will say things they didn't mean, they will fly off the handle and say terrible things, or they'll run away and slam a door, or they'll freeze, deer in the headlights, just like say nothing. And then you want to say something, they say nothing. So for adults and for children, we need to calm down first, because when we are triggered, the forebrain, the logical brain kicks out. There is no logic there. Nothing at all. So then we try and bring logic in. It's falling on deaf ears. And the words that are coming out of a triggered person's space are words that they don't really mean. And when they've calmed down later on, they'll say, that wasn't what I intended. I wish I hadn't said that. But those words have already been said, and there's a lot of regret I see, even when I work with couples in couples therapy. They'll say, no, but I don't really mean that. But the person will say, but you said it. But you said it. So bad stuff gets said that we regret later. Again, we need to calm ourselves down before reacting. We need to also, regarding our children, maybe what we need to do when we see they're triggered, give them something to eat, give them something cold to drink, maybe even go outside, move their bodies around, just do something different to take them out of the situation, not engaging with it, except mirroring possibly, but bringing them to a calmer space so that their upstairs brain, which is the brain of understanding and connection, can kick in and they can talk about what happens. This takes time, it's not a quick thing, but hopefully that will help also in the conversations around screens.
So screens are with us all the time. I have my one in my pocket now. I don't know if Sue has hers, but she probably does. We feel quite lost with our screens, and they slowly infiltrate into so much of what we do. And I love that illustration of packing a backpack for a journey. If you've got your backpack full and you need more stuff, you've got to take something out to put it in. Now, when you've got your cell phone, and when our kids have cell phones, very often they are so infilling of their whole being, of their thoughts, that when you try and come and have a discussion with them, they're just not there. And it happens with spouses too. Sue and I do the park run, not very often, but we do the park run. And the one in our home is around a thing called Rondebosch Common. It's a big open common area in the shadow of Table Mountain. The University of Cape Town's on the hill. It's beautiful. It really is just a inspiring, uplifting place. On one side there's a big pine forest, and we were running around twice around the common, chatting, talking to people, seeing people, encouraging people, having the best time. It was beautiful. The sun was warm. We were shorts and t-shirts. It was just like, and it wasn't a fast run. We stayed around that common, but we were connected as a couple, and we were connected with our environment. And as we slowed down at the end, the girl came running past us, and she was running towards the chap walking in front of us, hunched over, holding something with earphones in his ear. And we watched a very lovely girl trying to engage with a totally disengaged, maybe boyfriend, maybe husband. She went up to him and she said, "What time did you do?" And he didn't look at his watch because he was looking at something else. And then she asked 3 or 4 more questions. And she commented on, "Check the mountain, isn't it lovely?" And he didn't look. And she said eventually, as we got level to them, she said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm an important part of the movie." So while she had been enjoying connection with people, connection with her body, connection with nature, he'd been immersed in the concoction of some Hollywood director's mind, oblivious to the world around him, the people around him, and somebody desperately wanted his attention. Now, phones hijack our brains, and that's why there's a great concern over cell phone use, particularly because they're such integral parts of our life. I'm getting quite brave now. We put a train to Reading yesterday. But last time I was in London, all the stations, they had those tube maps and rail maps so you could sort of get some spatial identity. I don't know if you've noticed, to board a train lately, those don't exist. There's a number board up there that makes sense to people who know the sequence of the trains. How do you find the sequence of the trains and the stations? You look at an app. Phones are the thing. You get onto a train, there's no eye contact. Everyone is on an app. It's quite an interesting thing. So phones are so integrated into our lives, the way we do things. Screens so integrated. Sainsbury's. You know, you Brits are so trusting and honest. This check your own stuff out. We did it the other day, and we managed not to steal anything. It was really difficult because it was so tempting. You know, who's looking? But not only that, my next trick for wear my big boy pants, I'm going to get one of those little screeny things where you go along and beep your stuff as you go along. It's like Disneyland for adults. But even shopping in Sainsbury's becomes screen interaction, not looking at people. We make an appointment, we walk along and in Sainsbury's, saying hello to people. It's quite a startling experience. The guys normally check their fly to make sure they're not embarrassing themselves. And the women scurry away, they think they're being harassed. Because everyone's looking at a screen and in their own little world. So that's the reality of screens. So we need to engage gently with our children who are, remember, they are natives in this screen world. Many of us are immigrants to the screen world. I grew up with a phone was on the wall in the house. You know, to have an intimate conversation, you took a phone that was tethered to the wall and you hid yourself in a cupboard and whispered to your girlfriend. It was a very, very different world. Kids now are native, they've been born into this environment. And it's really a different world that we don't always understand. You know what I did first thing when I got off the plane? I looked around for an ATM to draw cash. 1 week down, all the cash I drew is still in my wallet. Because hey, in this world they don't use cash. It's tapping stuff. It's a different thing. Now, kids are familiar with that. I'm an immigrant in this world. And I've got lots to learn. Now, as parents, we have much to learn from our kids, just as they have much to be gained by our guidance and our walking with them. So phones are good things. When we arrived at Winnie Station, it was freezing cold. It was fantastic to be able to send Sharon a message and get that warming seat to come and fetch us. So there's good to phones. There's bad to phones. There's that rabbit hole that you can go down so easily. I'm looking for a doctor's cap. They didn't have one at Marks and Spencer yesterday, so I spent about an hour today Googling doctor's caps. And Sue kept on nudging me, and she can speak loudly sometimes, to encourage me to focus. Because, and that's, the bad of it. There's the ugly side of it as well, and the ugly side of the phones is what we want to spend quite a bit of time talking about. It's that ambush by algorithms, by push marketing. Temu, the Chinese online seller, just hit South Africa. And probably in their first month of arrival, probably 90% of the pings on my phone were from China when I didn't know and didn't want to know. But that's the power of the bad and the ugly. These algorithms are manipulating us whether we like it or not. They're manipulating our kids. And one of the real worries about those things is pornography is an industry. It's a multi-million US dollar, British pound industry. And on a normal social media platform, when you're not looking for porn, a normal platform, you're actually exposed to about 15,000 sexual topics. Things that appeal to your sexuality a year. And this is empirical research. There are about 10,000 sexual innuendos or nudges that you'll get in any 1 month, and that's not looking at a suspect site. That's just modern day marketing. That's the way they do these things. So in addition to this, for our kids, there are unfortunately porn versions for virtually every kiddie's game. One of my daughters, who is Barbie doll crazy, got hold of our phone and typed Barbie games. She was sitting on the floor wanting to play games with their Barbies and wanted to see if there were Barbie games. Don't type it into your phone. They're not the sort of games you want your daughter to play at all. It was a portal to pure porn. And that's the reality of the world our kids are living in, that many of us are part of, but just scratching the surface of.
Yeah, the online activities and the types of things that children are up to. So Lorata is cognitively impaired. She's 26 at the moment, but when she was, it was actually just probably even a few months ago, it's hard for me to tell who she's dating because a lot of the stuff happens online. And she's friends with all sorts of people. And one day I was sitting next to her on the couch, and she said to me, Mom, look at this message from this boy. I said, who is this boy? No, she does know this boy. She was at school with him a while back. And the message said, show me your pussy. So I'm like, oh dear. So then I said, well, tell him we only have a doggy. And we sent a picture of our Staffy. And of course, the boy instantly disappeared and she didn't hear from him again. But I mean, that's what kids are getting from other kids. And we were chatting just before this evening, sometimes even if we're very careful with the things that our kids are involved with, the WhatsApp groups that our kids are on, or the things that our kids are talking to other kids about, exposes them to things that we've never wanted them to know about, or maybe it's not age appropriate, or maybe the way kids speak to each other. That's a huge danger. So we think, okay, well, they've just got WhatsApp with their friends, but that can open up a whole can of worms. And the other thing is the progression and intensity of online relationships is very fast. So a lot of my clients that I've seen have been single women who've been on dating sites and looking for relationships, and I've heard far more about this than I ever wanted to know about. And how much people disclose to one another online is way more than you would if you did it in person. So relationships will escalate quickly, and soon those photographs of body parts are requested. And the other thing I see also in my clients as well, I see the speed at which answers to messages are expected. And I know we all have that. You know, someone sends us a message, are we going to have the 2 blue ticks and not answer them? I just don't. I just answer when I can. But there's an expectation one should answer straight away. But the devastation of women who've finally got into a relationship with a guy, finally slept with the guy, and then for days afterwards she doesn't get a message. Just absolute devastation.
So the other thing that's a big thing, a big worry for me in my corporate life, I was an HR exec for a multinational company, and we learned very quickly that when people applied for jobs, the first step in the screening process was to actually do an online check, not just on LinkedIn, but on Facebook and all the other social platforms. And what disqualified people up front at the very first hurdle of a recruitment process was inappropriate memes, photographs, and speech. And the reality of the devices that we hold and that our kids all want is that record, even if you delete it from your phone, it exists. I'm no expert at these things, but I've been told, and I believe, that every single WhatsApp that's been sent, every single Facebook message, every single picture, even when it isn't on your phone, still exists in cyberspace.
Even if it's deleted.
Even if it's deleted, it's there. And we had a thing in our previous church where there was a bad situation, and we collaborated with American Homeland Security, I think, cyber specialists, and we had a whole meeting where we had to interrogate a youth worker's hard drive and his online presence. It was all there. And the big thing for our kids particularly is to encourage them not to put anything up on a social platform, on a screen, that they wouldn't mind putting in a public billboard. Because what they put up there in the dark corner of a bedroom, or under peer pressure in a rugby changing room, where they take photographs of themselves, that's there forever. Child porn, and this is an interesting thing, is classified as a naked photograph of a person under the age of 18. Now, the age is quite an important thing. Most kids who get smartphones as youngsters can't afford to buy them. So who buys them? A parent. Sometimes on a contract. Who does the phone belong to? If your child does something stupid with a phone, that could be misconstrued or misinterpreted or interpreted as child pornography, the law comes after the parent, not the child, because the phone, the device, was bought by the parent. So there are massive, massive risks in us not guiding our children, having dialogue with them, and helping them to master the benefits of these incredible devices without being suckered by the danger associated with exactly the same device. The other thing that we become aware of, we've got 4 daughters and they've brought our attention to it, is this thing, I think it's a universal term of catfishing, where people in chat rooms, I'm speaking from naivety, I've never been in one, but apparently there are these things on the internet where you can access like-minded people, and that leads to exploitation, manipulation, and danger to children. And this is something that's real. It's something that happens in South Africa, which is the bottom end of the world, and I'm sure happens just as much right here. Sexual groomers, there's a lot of publicity about these things now, and as a result of inappropriate sexual behavior, the Archbishop of Canterbury had to stand down last week because of stuff he knew that he should have reported. It's big stuff, particularly in this decade. People are coming out and they are talking, and prominent leaders, politically connected clergy leaders, people in business, are being called out for behavior that was totally inappropriate 20 years ago, when maybe it wasn't as inappropriate in the minds of perpetrators, but by today's standards, chronically inappropriate. Now, these sexual groomers are very, very clever people. They are people who start off on programs and places inhabited by kids, and they set out to win trust, to curry favor, to set up a meeting, and then who knows what happens, or to blackmail kids. Jonathan Haidt, who we'll talk about later on, who I mentioned last week, has tracked from an academic perspective the rise in teenage girl suicides since the arrival of the smartphone, and he's correlated the rise in teen suicides to the blackmail that teenage girls experience once they've been catfished or suckered or groomed into taking photographs of body parts. And it comes back to haunt them, either through sexual exploitation, through blackmail, or who knows what else. It's a scary, scary thing. Predators hang out where children are. Predators are on YouTube, predators are on TikTok, and all these other seemingly innocuous things. And we as parents have to equip our kids to deal with these things. If you have a firearm, in South Africa it's a requirement you to keep it under lock and key. And that's just common sense, because if you had a firearm in a house and a toddler, you wouldn't leave a loaded pistol lying on the table in reach of a child. I think you wouldn't, even if you're not a gun owner, you wouldn't take your kid on a drive without ensuring they're strapped in. If you have a toddler, you would spend a fortune at Marks and Spencer on one of those deluxe padded 6-point safety harness chairs, because it's the good of the child. And we as parents have got to learn to communicate and to dialogue with our kids very early on, to enable them to get the best out of the screens, which are with us. They're not going to go away. Even if you move to Outer Hebrides, you'll find a cell phone tower somewhere there. We've got to learn to work with it. And that's a challenge that is an evolving one, because there isn't a quick fix answer. But we'll talk more about that later.
Yeah, so we all know that algorithms operate, and that the phone gives more of what the person watches, and often with increased intensity to keep the interest going. And then we're thinking about porn sites. These sites objectify women, and they teach our children that violent sex is good, and the lie that women must put up with it. And research has shown us that porn use has increased erectile dysfunction from 3% in men to 33% in men. And this is because the brain has been rewired so that it cannot perform normally in real relationships. It's so used to performing on these porn sites, the brain is actually wired in a different way. So normal relationships aren't as natural and easy.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? In couples therapy, I've seen the impact of unrealistic sexual expectations that partners can have of each other due to watching porns. This often leads to one of the couple feeling inadequate and withdrawing and never feeling good enough. Yes, and I think I've just recently worked with a couple who had a hidden porn addiction, and he hadn't disclosed it, it hadn't come up in the session at all. And he kept calling his wife out on her underperformance. And over a lot of time of working together, did he finally say that actually underneath this all was the porn addiction. So porn harms our brains, it harms our relationship, and it harms our world. It forms neural pathways that impact our behavior and our responses. And last week we spoke about neuroplasticity, which is a good thing because our brains can be rewired. But in my work with people, I've seen that it takes a long time once your brain has been wired down a certain path to change that wiring and to get it into a more healthy way.
So what can we do? And we're sort of going between both adult stuff and kids stuff because the screens are applicable in both worlds. But what can we do specifically for our kids? This Jonathan Haidt has really put the cat amongst the pigeons in February this year when he wrote his book, The Anxious Generation. And he and his cohort of academics did extensive, hard research into American adolescents who had grown up in the screen generation. And he tracked behavioral outcomes like that suicide statistic amongst young girls over the age of 14. And he not only highlighted the reality of the proven effect of screens on the lives of people, he also came up with a couple of solutions. Now, some of these are quite extreme. I'm going to go through them quickly because they're not for you to go home and do tomorrow, but just to help you in your dialogue, in your village, and with your kids as to how we're going to navigate the screen-infested world. It's a reality. It's not going to go away. We've got to not just survive in it, we have to learn to thrive in it, to live healthy, wholesome lives, and to help our kids to do that as well. The first thing that he says, no kid before the age of 13 should be given a phone. Now, straight away you think, but I need to be in touch. What happens if they miss a school bus? What happens if There are lots of reasons we can think of why that isn't a good idea. There are more reasons as to why it is a good idea. Because a kid without a phone has to play, has to do all sorts of things. Jonathan Haidt makes much of free play with children. That's the sort of stuff that we had in our lives growing up as kids. And you probably had a similar thing where a children's park had fairly dangerous things in it. We had big steel slides that you could go down backwards, frontwards. You could do a face plant in gravel. And when you'd done that, you learned not to do that again. Next time you went down, you went on your bum, feet first into the gravel. It was a lot less painful. We climbed jungle gyms and we tried to balance on the top of them. And often we fell off. And when you had a big fat bruise and a scraped knee, you'd learned something about the limits of your own physical ability and how stupid it was to try and balance on top of a jungle gym. So this whole thing of phones too early get kids into a static environment, denies them play.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, the whole thing of boredom. I mean, one of the things my kids knew they never had to say to me was that I'm bored.
Big trouble if you said that.
I was like, you've got a brain. If you have a brain, you cannot be bored. But actually, because we just always have screens and TV and stuff, it's so much easier for us to just put them in front of that. But for them to be bored is difficult for us as parents because they first go through a whole doldrum, of being miserable and griping and carrying on. But actually, if you push through that, and it's actually more for the parents' tenacity, they have to push through that to get to the place where creativity can take place. And it honestly works. So I must say, cell phones and screens really help us as parents at certain times, but don't be scared of the board word, because if they have a brain, they can think of something to do.
So, no smartphones, no phones before 13, no social media before 16. No social media before 16. This is particularly for girls, because girls get catty, bitchy, and they form gangs. The amount of isolation that takes place when kids in that 14 to 16 age group are on social media is unbelievable. We had supper a couple of months ago with friends of ours who have a 14-year-old son at a very elite Cape Town school, and he had misbehaved at home, so they took his smartphone away as a punishment for 1 week. He was going to have no phone. He lasted 2 days before he refused to go back to school and was in tears, and he's a strapping thug of a 14-year-old boy. And when they eventually got his emotional brain calmed down and were able to have a logical discussion with him, Ryan told his folks that he's so lonely at break time, because at break time at one of the top schools in Cape Town, 14-year-old boys don't talk to each other. They walk out the classroom, they open their sandwiches, they sit down, they switch on their phones, and they talk to people somewhere else or do something else. So these phones, particularly in that 14 to 16 age group, can actually be a barrier to making friendships, a barrier to feeling connected, a barrier to belonging. And all around the high schools in Cape Town, certainly at a break time, you see heads bowed over glowing screens. And there's no more playing in playgrounds, there's no more fun, there's no more raucous laughter from boys. There's silence in school playgrounds. It's quite scary. So Jonathan Haidt's thing is no social media till you're 16. He says no phones during the school day. And he's encouraged, and this has actually taken root in Cape Town where we're from, where they have a movement called screen-free schools, where they're encouraging parents in schools through parent-teachers associations and parents and school governing bodies, and that's a role for all parents to play if they're concerned about their children's welfare, is to get elected onto a school governing body. I don't know what the process is in the UK, but if you can get into that position of influence over the child's school environment, you're able to safeguard your child's future in a way far more effectively than if you at home are working in isolation. So he suggests that you go into dialogue with schools, with teachers, with educators, with other families about not having screens at school until a certain stage. Now, our granddaughters are at a going sort of year 5 now, I suppose, and it's compulsory for them to have tablets. So schools have, tablets have become part of the hardware that schools use. So this is quite a big ask, but certainly it's something worth dialoguing, talking about. Can we as a community work together to protect our kids from the worst of screens while allowing them to access the best of them? And then the big thing that Jonathan Haidt says, free play. He says when kids can play as we did in our youth, we'd go to a neighborhood park and you'd have a pickup game, and you knew you were unpopular if you were the last person chosen on the one of the sides, and everyone else had got picked, and then you just went there. Then you knew you had to up your game a little bit and be a little bit kinder, be a little bit different, change your attitude, improve your ball skills. You actually learned a whole lot about interacting with fellow human beings through playground play. Kids don't have that anymore. So many of our schools as well, we chuckle going past Forest School over here where we meet on Sunday, where the strap line is aspire to
Be elite.
be elite. Aspire to be elite. Now, in our context, that's noble, but is it helpful? I spent 2 years working with the oldest school in South Africa, my alma mater, which had been around, it's very young by British standards. It had been around since about 1828, but that's very old in South Africa, unlike some people's houses. And this school for years had striven to be the best school in South Africa. That was a sort of strap line. And after 2 years of workshopping with governors, with leadership, with staff, with learners, we just changed the preposition from being the best school in South Africa to be the best school for South Africa. And just the change of a preposition changed the ethos of the school from bullying, from macho-ness, from toughness to inclusivity. So there's stuff that parents can do by being involved in school communities. Sometimes it just takes changing a 2-letter word to bring about change that brings wholeness and sensibility in the lives of kids. Now, some thoughts on what's been termed the great digital hijack. We don't know it's happened, but our brains have been hijacked. All our brains have, us and our kids. In the grand tapestry of human history, I love this quote, we've woven a new glittering thread. It's the digital age. We're never going to go back from this. It's never going to disappear. We hooked, hook, line, and sinker. It's part of us. It's part of our DNA, even more part of our kids' DNA. In a world of infinite scrolls, dopamine hits, and the constant allure of the next notification, we live beneath this shiny world, below which there's a dark, dark battle unfolding. A battle for our children's minds, for their attention. It's a time when the executive functioning kids' skills that Sue spoke about have yet not developed fully yet. That prefrontal cortex of the brain is still very plasticky, that neuroplasticity, and it's been formed by things that we don't really know about. That prefrontal cortex, it's deep within our skulls, and it's the brain's chief executive officer. The thoughts that come in get directed from that prefrontal cortex. It controls our impulse control, our ability to resist immediate gratification. It's all happening over there, and it's not fully developed till our 20s. The whole thing of decision making, about weighing options, about consequences, about making sound choices, doing a risk analysis, that's prefrontal cortex stuff. And in our children, not fully developed yet. Planning and organization. Why our kids go scatty? Why do they think the floor is part of their cupboard? Why do they do what they do without the sort of logical thought that we as parents have? Prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed yet. What about emotional regulation? Managing emotions in a healthy way is something that teenagers grow into. Why do they call them the terrible teens? Teenagers don't know. It's just their brain is muddled, befuddled, and they do irrational things. So unfortunately, the critical brain region, this prefrontal cortex, doesn't fully mature till our mid-20s. And it's particularly susceptible to influence during childhood and adolescence. It's a time when our children are still developing the skills unique to childhood, and social media and gaming platforms are well positioned on this battleground to exploit their vulnerability. I'm just amazed at some of the games I watch kids play which encourage death. These shooting games, they're quite fun. In my context, it took me till 19 when I went to national service and had to learn how to kill people. And even then it was a big ask. But now you get little kids thinking shooting people is fun. What's that doing to their brains?
And we see how technology is hijacking young brains, and I think any addiction actually hijacks our brains. So social media platforms and video games are designed to be addictive. And they're built on persuasive technology. And these platforms utilize intermittent variable rewards, which are similar to slot machines, triggering a release of dopamine, which is a feel-good neurotransmitter, and creating a sense of anticipation. The constant stream of notifications and the fear of missing out further capture attention, interrupting focus and hindering the development of crucial cognitive skills. This reliance on external stimuli can lead to difficulties in delayed gratification, attention regulation, and emotional control, potentially impacting long-term well-being and academic performance. All sounds a bit hair-raising.
Sounds terrible. Can kids self-regulate? And the answer is yes, some of them can. And if you have a kid who can self-regulate, you're lucky. But most kids are particularly vulnerable to this digital hijack, which can so easily lead to compulsive behaviors, making it difficult to pull away even if they know they should. They may struggle to recognize the signs of addiction, and they may need help to set boundaries. In addition, their immature, yet to be developed frontal cortexes, their immature brains may cause them to act impulsively and make poor decisions and choices online, which are highly visible on the internet and impossible to erase. So these algorithms, pitching these advanced algorithms against immature brains is really a very unfair fight. And that's something which we as parents should learn to protect our kids from. While it's true that some children can self-regulate better than others, many will still struggle. It's very difficult for children to resist the allure of screens and peer pressure, especially when these screens are designed to be so attractive and engaging, and the sort of banter in playgrounds in schools is, have you seen the new game? And if you haven't, you're just not cool. So there's a massive attraction. Research suggests that parental involvement is crucial in helping children develop and reinforce healthy habits around technology. And this is particularly the case in neurodiverse children. There's a lot of dialogue that needs to take place. Simply setting up rules is yesterday's news. So what can a parent do? We've got a couple of things that we've dialed back from the extremities of Jonathan Haidt's suggestion, and we're going to come up with 10 or 12 things that you want to consider doing, and maybe you can discuss around the table when we finish.
So stay connected to your children and know what they are watching and know what they are doing.
And that isn't always easy. You know, when you watch Peppa Pig 400 times, you know Peppa Pig pretty well. But don't fall into that trap of letting your kids sit in a different room just so you can have a bit of peace and quiet to get on with your chores. Devices must have monitoring filters on them. They're particularly for kids. There are lots of these things available. Maybe people around your table when you discuss this can point in the right direction. If you don't know about these things, pop a question on the group. We can send you details of them.
So have boundaries, limited time, limited apps, and know who they are speaking to, and no gaming with strangers.
In our family, we had an open device policy that's worked for us, and I do recommend it. Start early. It's a bit hard to introduce this when they're already teenagers. But we lived in America for a couple of years, and our password for everything we own is the street address of the house we lived in Fort Worth, Texas, like their postal code. It opens our bank accounts, our telephones, everything we own. It's the only number we can really remember other than my wife's birthday. So that's what we've done, and it's worked for us. So you can pick up any phone anywhere in our house when our kids were growing up, and you could use it. And if you had to, they knew you could look through it. And it was just something that they could do the same with ours. They could pick up my phone or Sue's phone and fiddle with the phone. My grandchildren have the same, my daughters have the same thing with my grandkids. So that thing of an open phone device policy is a good thing. Don't have phones in bedrooms anywhere. Healthy family technology for husbands and wives as well as for kids is, if you have phones, have a central docking place. Get them out of the bedrooms, improve quality of sleep, and take away temptation.
And then instill values in your child so they know their worth, because they are becoming what they're watching.
And that's quite a serious thing, and that's the thing for a lot of dialogue for parents to have with kids. Just how uniquely and wonderfully your kids are made, the fantastic future that's been planned for them. greater than they can ever dream of if they nurture and look after that which they've been given. So be the first to give your children sex education. Now this is Sue's big one, you must talk to that.
I must. Well, I think it's never too early to tell the truth. Tell the truth to your kids. They are going to find out so many things online, and it's best that the earlier the better. And I always found that even before our children reach puberty, like when they're 7 and 8, before they get to that very embarrassed kind of phase, oh mom, don't talk about that. You need to do it long before that. And actually, you know what, when you tell them the truth when they're very young, they find it weird, but they accept it. And then they know the truth. And it's best to do that as early as you possibly can. And also when they ask the questions. Do you want me to carry on?
Yeah.
Okay. And then also prepare them for the dangers that are lurking online. So when they come across them, they won't be shocked. I think we need to be able to speak about these things to our children. They won't be shocked. They are still shocked, but they won't be surprised because they know this stuff happens. The minute they see it, they know there's an open connection with you, and they will come and tell you, look what I found. You know, when Loretta said, show me your pussy, you know, she showed it to me and she told me about that. So it's important to have that open conversation.
And then big thing for kids who start using their phones to communicate with other people is that they should only speak or text to someone online that they've actually met in person. And the rule is you should breathe together before you text together. But the dangers lurking behind the anonymity of a voice note or text message, you don't know who you're dealing with. So you only voice note or text people that you've seen.
Okay, then I'm just going to skip to this part that says, I want to just add, if you haven't had these conversations with your children and they're already sort of older and you sort of think you've missed the boat, still have these conversations. It's fine. And you can even say, listen, I wasn't aware of all this stuff. This is the stuff that I've become aware of. Let's have a conversation about it. And don't do it when they're busy watching and telling them to stop watching something. Do it completely in a different situation. And you know, just have that conversation with them.
And then there are new resources to help us as parents on a daily basis. Literally discovered yesterday some cutting edge research done by 2 women in London, a book that maybe you would consider reading. It's called Parenting for a Digital Future, How Hopes and Fears about Technology Shape Our Children's Lives. It's their hopes and our fears very, very often. Preparing for a Digital Future argues that digital parenting is not only about technology. It's actually about the relationship you have with your child regarding that technology. So before rules and regulations comes that space where you can talk and connect, a place where you can both be in your left brains, not in your emotional right brains. It's not a discussion that you have when you have a blow up about something inappropriate that that's been brought to your attention. It's about when you can use your left brain discussing maybe the same thing that they brought you and said, wow, Mom, you told me about this and it's happened. Hey Dad, have you seen anything like this? And you as a parent can then go into that sort of dialogue. So the thing for digital parenting, they suggest there are 3 possible scenarios. One, you could embrace it and work with your child in developing healthy relationship with this technology that won't go away. And then you sort of all in. You move from being a digital immigrant to a digital native yourself. And that's one extreme. Some can do that. For most of us, we've just got to work out a balance between what's good and what can we cope with, what should we not go for. In our home, for instance, I was lucky with girls only. We've never had those Xbox things. It was the Xbox because I'd had enough friends where I'd seen Xbox being a rabbit hole that they went down. So our kids, if they wanted exercise, didn't do aerobics on Xbox. They went and played tennis outside. So you can actually get a balance between having technology. There was a TV set in the house. It just wasn't connected to an Xbox. That's how we maintained our balance. The other thing you can do is you can resist this and move to Outer Hebrides, burn down the only cell phone tower in the place, live in a crofter's cottage, and homeschool your kids. And we don't recommend that as well, because this digital onslaught is with us to stay. It isn't going to go away. It's fantastically good for us, but it's not the best thing if left untethered. It requires engagement. Now, what we've done, and we're going to put it on the group, we're not going to discuss it now. A friend of ours in Cape Town, a guy called Duncan Ray, big into IT, knows all these things, 2 teenage boys, has put together what he calls a digital contract. And we're going to put it on the group for you to print at home, look through, go through. This isn't a one size fits all. Duncan did it expressly for himself, his wife Erin, and his 2 boys. He invites us to take what he's used and worked on and developed that's worked in his family and adapt it for your family. As a husband and wife, work through it first. Then invite the kids in when parents have got consensus on what boundaries are and what good practices are. And at the end of drawing up a family digital contract, every member of the family signs it. So it's not a put a kid into jail exercise. It's a thing of we as a family are going to develop a healthy attitude towards technology. It's going to be healthy for mom, for dad, for brother, for sister, for granny and grandpa if they come and visit. This is the way this family interacts with technology to make the best use of something which can be very detrimental if left uncovered. So, there was a lot of talking. We want to hear your voices now. So we've got a couple of questions that we'd just like to pop out. And please, round the tables, fill up your glasses, grab something to eat. The idea of these questions, again, repeating what we said last week, is not to embarrass you or to shame you publicly for the bad job you've done, but for us to be honest so we can learn from each other. The best and the biggest learnings in life are those that are made when we make a mistake and pick ourselves up and self-correct. So I'm just hoping that when we're back in Cape Town, sun tanning or sitting in seats that aren't heated, that the village that is here will be a resource to the other inhabitants of the village, that you'll be able to talk to people who from a discussion at the table you discover have kids a bit older than yours about how they coped, because you're here to walk with each other through something that requires collaboration. No family is going to win this challenge single-handed because it's evolving on a daily basis. We don't know what it's going to look like next year or the year after that, but we know it's changing fast, and we as parents need to work together and walk together in embracing the challenges for the good. So, first question, I'd like you to just spend a couple of minutes chatting to each other out. We've said a lot. It's been a bit of a ramrod. We tried to cut out a lot, but we didn't succeed very well. What's the one thing that you'd like to do differently relative to your kids or your own behavior after the session? It's been a lot of information, but what was the one thing that you think you could do differently, personally or with your children? I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to bounce it around. Sue and I are going to sit around, walk around, not to snoop, but just to eat more than we managed last time. Our table ate everything last time, so we're going to come and harvest your table now. So
And eat while you talk.
about 10 minutes to eat, to drink, to be merry.
You want to take that?